I guess I am. I'm compelled.
Break a leg.
The power of Christ.
So without further ado,
By the power of the grand.
our outgoing favorite secular Buddhist.
Can we have an honorary favorite secular Buddhist?
Our favorite.
Oh, I think you got to do the
Oh, I figured.
clicker.
We should give him
I have to
Unless,
plug
unless
you.
someone else wants to. Rob.
I have to plug you in and make sure you're.
Nope. Rob's nope. Right. Oh. Miss Dolly Mama.
You see how I like me?
Go, brother.
Okay. I'm doing a presentation on secular Buddhism. Most of you probably already know the Dalai Lama, but he is the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist sect of Buddhism. He says, basically the Buddhist attitude is that you should not accept certain things through sheer faith, and you should need a skeptical attitude. Buddha himself made this clear to his followers. He said, you should not accept those things I taught you out of respect for me, but rather through investigation by yourself. And I want to mirror that. Anything I say tonight, I don't want you to accept it just because I said it. I don't want you to take anything on faith. Everything I say can be researched, tested, or experienced yourself. And to me, that's the whole draw of Buddhism, is that it's not like a faith-based religion. Some religions are, just depends. All right, go ahead. Okay, so what is Buddhism? Buddhism is based on the life of Siddhartha, who was the original Buddha. But Buddha it's a label, it's a term. Anyone can be a Buddha. It simply means awakened one. So he's not like Jesus, where it's like there can only be one Jesus, right? There's only one Messiah. For Buddhism, anyone could be a Buddha. He was just the first one. He was a prince who lived in Nepal about 500 years before Christ. He was not a god. He was not a son of a god. He had no magical or divine powers. He didn't claim to be special in any way. And he was a human being who attained enlightenment or nirvana through completely natural means that anybody, according to Buddhism, that anybody can achieve. All right, go ahead. So what is Buddhism concerned with? Buddhism is concerned with suffering, primarily concerned with suffering. Why do human beings, it's concerned with questions like, why do human beings suffer? What is the cause of suffering? Where does suffering come from? Is there a solution to suffering, and what is the solution? All right, go ahead. Here's things that Buddhism is not concerned with. Buddhism is not concerned with what happens in the afterlife. It is not concerned with where we come from. It is not concerned with how the universe began, or how life began, or what our purpose is, or if there's a God, or what God wants. In fact, from the Buddhist perspective, these kinds of questions are just distractions, because from the Buddhist view, everyone is seeking happiness or an end to suffering. That's the main goal of everyone in life. Every human being, whether they realize it or not, we're all seeking happiness. We're all seeking a solution to suffering. But most people are looking in the wrong places. And from the Buddhist perspective, those kinds of existential questions like, what is our meaning? What is our purpose? Where did we come from? Those are just a way we think that by having an answer to those questions it will end suffering, but it won't. And that's why Buddhism just views those as distractions. Ultimately, everyone is seeking a solution to suffering, whether that be with drugs that they take to temporarily avoid it, or whether they are seeking paradise in the next life. It's the same end goal, an end to suffering, but there is, according to Buddhism, only one true end to suffering, and it must be achieved through your own merit. Okay, go ahead. This is the Dalai Lama. He says, I believe the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. Whether one believes in religion or not, whether one believes in that religion or this religion, we're all seeking something better in life. So I think the very notion of our life is towards happiness. Again, that's a very Buddhist notion that we are all seeking peace. We're all seeking an end to suffering. That is our main motivation. Go ahead. So what causes suffering? First thing I want to say about this before I get started is that there's not one easy answer to this. If it were that simple, like why do we all suffer, we'd all have the solution and no one would suffer, right? I mean, it's not a simple answer to the question. It's a very complex question. It's a philosophical question that's been around since the beginning of humanity, I suppose. But what I'll do is present it from a lot of different perspectives to kind of hear some of the different takes on what causes suffering. From the scientific view, it's the human brain evolved to favor reproduction, not happiness. So our genes compel us to reproduce, but they're not concerned about our happiness. From a religious perspective, human beings have a sinful nature, and that's why we suffer. From a philosophical perspective, we're burdened by selfish craving and desire which cannot be satiated. From an intellectual perspective, our ego prevents us from seeing things as they really are. From a cosmic perspective, we view ourselves as separate from the rest of the universe, when in fact we are the universe, we're part of the universe. And from a layman's perspective, to put it in a common vernacular, these are all just different ways of saying that human beings have a misperception of reality. That if we understood things correctly, we would master inner peace. And to borrow from John, the truth shall set you free. So
I
go.
copied that. It wasn't me.
Okay. So, what would you say?
He's being snarky.
I borrowed that. It wasn't me.
Yeah, okay.
That's good.
Okay, so there is... Oh, I got it. Okay, sorry. I don't know why it took me so long. I'm just distracted. Okay, so then it's in Buddhism, this idea that overcoming suffering is a personal journey. It's something that has to be achieved through your own effort. No one else can save you. No one else can do it for you. And so the whole idea in Buddhism is much more individualistic. It's like about hard work and motivating yourself to overcome suffering. So no one can save us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. And that was Siddhartha who said that. Go ahead. So Buddhism has been called the ultimate empirical philosophy. Buddhism embraces science. It does not fight it. It's not constantly in confrontation with science. On that topic, I guess Dr. Mays is going to be debating. At first I thought it was Chan, but it's someone that Chan, it's one of his...
So it's not official yet,
Yeah.
but it looks like potentially this summer he might be debating Charles Jackson.
a young earth creationist. And hopefully that'll be next semester, if it happens.
Yes.
That's exciting. But anyways, I thought that was an interesting kind of aside. But okay, that's one thing about Buddhism, is that it embraces science. It offers a parallel understanding of the way the world works based on experience. And so here's how science and Buddhism are compatible, right? Because science, the primary goal of science is to model the universe. It's to gain information about how things work and to map those and to have a base of knowledge about that. Buddhism is less concerned about knowledge and more concerned about experience, about experiencing things. So let me give you an example. You could have somebody for 100 years, if someone was in just a room without windows for 100 years, you could spend 100 years trying to explain to that person what the sun was. You could show them pictures, you could give them all the dimensions of the sun and the heat and solar maps. I mean, you could do anything you wanted to try to explain to someone what the sun was and what it was like, what it was made out of. But they wouldn't truly experience the sun, right? They wouldn't truly understand it until they were to go out and experience it themselves. You guys see what I mean? There's a difference between knowing something intellectually and knowing it intuitively, to have a personal experience with it. So you could say that these are two different forms of understanding something. To understand something in an intellectual way, and then to understand something intuitively because you've experienced it. And they're separate. No amount of explaining something to someone can ever replicate the experience of having it happen to you. Do you understand? And Buddhism is very conscious of this, and in a sense that is what it's all about. And so that's the way that science and Buddhism are compatible, because science, in a sense, is all about modeling and categorizing the world in an informational way, where Buddhism is all about the ultimate form of experience, in which knowledge is not even a factor. this kind of information, intellectual knowledge is not even a factor. And in the sense of attempting to perfectly understand reality through experience, Buddhism is supremely interested in finding the truth. John has said a few times, Buddhists don't care about truth. Actually, they do care a lot about what's true.
That I didn't say.
You didn't say it? Okay.
That I did say.
Oh, you did say it. Okay. So, and I don't know if you guys have ever, this is getting pretty philosophical, but I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but most of the time knowledge acts as a representation of experience, right? But it's not experience itself. So if someone were to tell you a story about something that happened to them, what are you doing when they tell you the story? Well, you're usually putting yourself in their shoes. You're trying to imagine what it would feel like if, whatever, you felt a cool beach, running against your skin, or you felt what it was like to be humiliated or attacked or something like that. So in a sense, when we talk about an apple, talking about this term apple, the term apple is a representation of something that you can experience. So for most of the cases, knowledge is like a cheap imitation of actual experience. And Buddhism realizes this. That's why in Buddhism, experience is the highest form of truth. Some examples would be like a sunset. Someone can explain to you what a sunset is like, but unless you actually experience it, you're not really going to know. A kiss, someone can tell you what a kiss is like, but until you actually have a kiss, it's a very different experience than what you hear. And holding a newborn child. I mean, there's just so many examples where knowledge utterly fails. It is just a substitute. The richest moments in life come from experiencing them firsthand, not hearing about them. In the same way, if one is to attain freedom from suffering, they are seeking an experience, not some knowledge. Go ahead. And then this is a famous quote: if science proves some belief of Buddhism wrong, then Buddhism will have to change. Go ahead. And this is just what I said. A fundamental truth about human condition is that to know something intellectually is different than experiencing it firsthand. And Buddha realized that some things simply cannot be explained, they must be experienced. In fact, that's true of most things. Explanations are a cheap substitute for experience. Go ahead. Albert Einstein, information is not knowledge. The only source of knowledge is experience. Now, in our Western culture, we generally think of information as the highest form of truth. But in Buddhism, experience is the highest form of truth. And so this is kind of a philosophical difference between what we were generally raised to believe, or what we have come to understand about reality, versus what Buddhism teaches. Go ahead. So, probably the final question you might ask about Buddhism is, okay, but how do you attain enlightenment? Well, obviously that's not something I can cover in just like a 30-minute presentation, but I would say that there's 5 main steps. Mindfulness, and who here has heard of or knows, does anyone know what mindfulness is? Okay, so we have some ideas. Mindfulness means being constantly aware of where you are and what is happening around you. Most of us drift through life in a dreamlike state, constantly carried away by our own stream of consciousness. Buddhism tells us that to be aware in the present moment is crucial to finding inner peace. So this is hard to explain, but essentially most of the time we're not really aware of where we are, maybe subconsciously, but can you imagine constantly bringing yourself back to the moment saying, I'm sitting, I'm watching a presentation, I'm eating food, I'm watching TV, to be constantly aware of what you're doing and where you are and the activity you're engaging in. That's mindfulness. Now for most of us, that's not how we live. Most of the time we're totally caught up in our thoughts or television or phone or whatever we're doing. We're constantly pulling our attention to something other than ourselves. So mindfulness is a big part of Buddhism, and the claim is that if you participate in mindfulness, it will improve your quality of life and eventually help you achieve inner peace. Hard work and determination, these are self-explanatory, but basically the path to inner peace is difficult and riddled with obstacles, and it requires a lot of work. Meditation is an incredible way to improve your own mental and physical health. This has been scientifically demonstrated again and again. I encourage you guys to research that. It has been shown to improve attention, regulate emotions more effectively, and even to cause structural changes in the brain over a short period of time. In other words, you don't have to meditate very long to start seeing benefits. And of course, both mindfulness and meditation have become key components to Western psychology, especially cognitive behavioral therapy. And then finally, commitment. This is important because commitment to the path isn't easy. It's very simple. It's very easy to get caught up looking for happiness through material pleasures, right? That's basically the point. That's the main point of Buddhism, is that it's very similar to Christianity in the idea that very few people will be able to achieve this because it's so difficult. Life is so riddled with pleasures and kind of material temptations and things of that nature that most people will not have the strength, the mental, emotional strength to totally commit themselves to this and to find a cure to suffering, basically. Go ahead. Okay, one other thing about Buddhism that I basically just mentioned. Buddhism is very hands-on. It's very by your own effort. This is something the Dalai Lama said in response to the 2015 Paris shootings, the terrorism acts in Paris. You guys remember? It wasn't that long ago. And everyone, whenever this stuff happens, there are always people, pray for the pray for the pray for the pray for the pray. And so I guess he was probably tired. He was sick of hearing that. Said it's unrealistic to think the future of humanity can be achieved only on the basis of prayer. What we need to do is take action. Go ahead.
I've said that too.
All right. Well, yeah. And then
I think he may stop that one for me.
oh, it might be. It could be. It's possible. And then this was just a couple months ago, 9th of February, and this was in response to probably some of the shootings. Maybe some of the school shootings that have been happening. Says, although I'm a Buddhist monk, I am skeptical that prayers alone will achieve world peace. We need to instead be enthusiastic and self-confident in taking action. Go ahead. So what is secular Buddhism? I kind of gave you a rundown of what Buddhism is. So what is secular Buddhism? Secular Buddhism is Buddhism without magic, the supernatural, reincarnation, miracles. You get it. Anything supernatural. It's Buddhism without all the fluff. I mean, it is said that Buddha, the original Buddha, Siddhartha, on his deathbed, begged his followers not to make a religion. He didn't want them to make a religion, though obviously you can't control that once he's dead, because anytime you have a religion, you always get these trappings of the supernatural and the spiritual stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? And some people, this is what appeals to them, but secular Buddhism takes out all this stuff. I'd make the argument that it's not necessary to achieve enlightenment. None of this stuff is necessary, because insofar as it's an experience that you can find, that you can have, what does all this have to do with it? This is just fluff. Go ahead. One other thing about Buddhism that kind of lends itself to a more secular philosophy is this. Dalai Lama again. Sectarian feelings and criticisms of other teachings and sects is very bad. Poisonous and should be avoided. So you don't see the same kind of hatred of other denominations, if you will. Buddhism doesn't have denominations, but you get the idea. There's not the same criticism and hatred and condemnation and, these denominations and beliefs are blasphemy and they're all going to hell. Buddha once taught his followers, he pointed to a tree and he said, look at that tree. My teachings are like one branch of this huge tree. And so Buddha's not saying that Buddhism is the only way. I mean, no one owns experience. I mean, Buddhism is one way to achieve it, enlightenment. But they're not pointing at all these different religions, and especially within their own religion, and saying it's impossible to find enlightenment through that religion. They're just saying this is the way that Buddha did it, and this is what works for us. And generally, the different sects of Buddhism, like you've got the Tibetan Buddhists, you've got the more Theravada, the traditional Buddhists. You got the Buddhists in Japan as well. And generally the different teachings are just different. Again, they're just like branches on a tree. They're just slightly different interpretations. Sometimes they're big differences, but they all appeal to different kinds of people. Some are more individualistic, some are more centered around groups, some are more based on logical puzzles. Some are more based on acts of compassion. It just depends. All right, go ahead. On the compatibility between Buddhism and science, some people, this is again Dalai Lama, some people say that from a certain angle, Buddhism is religion, but rather, Buddhism is not a religion, but rather a science of mind. Religion has much involvement with faith. Sometimes it seems that there is quite a distance between a way of thinking based on faith and one based on experiment, remaining skeptical. Unless you find something through investigation, you do not want to accept it as fact. From one viewpoint, Buddhism is a religion. From another viewpoint, Buddhism is a science of mind and not a religion. Buddhism can bridge between these two sides. Therefore, with this conviction, I try to have closer ties with scientists, mainly in the fields of cosmology, psychology, neurobiology, and physics. In these fields, there are insights to share, and to a certain extent, we can work together. Again, I view Buddhism and science as compatible insofar as one is interested in creating a theory of knowledge, or a theory of reality, a model of reality, where Buddhism is more interested in the experiential side of truth. So these are compatible because they're kind of the two sides of the same coin. Go ahead. All the world's major religions, with their emphasis on love, compassion, and patience, tolerance, and forgiveness, can and do promote inner values. But the reality of the world today is that grounding ethics in religion is no longer adequate. This is why I'm increasingly convinced that the time has come to find a way of thinking about spirituality and ethics beyond religion altogether. So this is the leader of Tibetan Buddhism, and he's saying it might be time just to get rid of religion, basically. Go ahead. And that's it. So do you guys have any questions?
I have them, I just need to let them,
Yeah, thanks.
simmer a little bit,
I have one kind of simple one.
Yeah.
So this enlightenment, is it more of a binary, you have it or you don't?
Yeah.
Is it at different points for different people? Or is it more of like a fuzzy line?
No, it's either you have it or you don't. Now there's a path to getting there, right? I mean, we can in our everyday lives almost think of it like this. Like, you could, like, the term enlightenment, for example, is part of our, like, modern vernacular. And so you could easily say that person is completely ignorant and that person is enlightened, or to think of someone as more enlightened than another person. Okay. So there is a path, right? I mean, there is a path in which a person slowly becomes more enlightened. But it is a binary in the sense that you either are truly enlightened or you're not. You know, you've either attained nirvana or you haven't. See what I'm saying?
Okay, so nirvana is the goal, and like that's kind of enlightenment.
Yeah, achieving nirvana. So in other words, it's an understanding of reality. Oh, did you have a question?
Well, how do you know you are enlightened then? Does somebody decide that for you? Or?
No, I mean, it's one of those things. You know, have you ever heard that phrase, like, you'll know when you see it, kind of thing? It's not as though there's some kind of test, you know? And a lot of people probably do believe that they're enlightened, that they don't, that they aren't. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but wouldn't that make it sort of subjective a little bit?
It is.
I mean, it's all about experience.
It's about experience. It is subjective. So the question is, you know, if you say that experiencing something makes it subjective, you know, the question is, are we all experiencing the same reality? And in that sense, experience isn't subjective because we all are having an experience of the same universe, you know? But the idea is that to be enlightened, or to be a Buddha, which means to be awake, like what I was talking about before, that people kind of walk through life in a dreamlike state. The idea that being awakened is something that you can achieve is, yes, that's the goal of Buddhism, but there's no test. I mean, there's like no test you can take because it's an experience. But that's the claim. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, that's the claim, that there is an enlightenment. But there's no way to prove it. I mean, I guess you can talk to an enlightened person and say, wow, he's really enlightened, but it's not really proof. So.
What's the difference between Buddhism and then like hedonism?
Did you say hedonism?
Yeah, because you talk about a lot about like Buddhism about being happy, like maybe and that's saying about hedonism, like the pleasure principle.
Well, hedonism is seeking happiness through temporary pleasure. And
you said drugs in your PowerPoint, so like that's temporary.
Yeah, but I was speaking how most people are seeking happiness through drugs and through material pleasures and just pleasures in their life, and even seeking happiness in the next life. From the Buddhist perspective, those are all wrong. I mean, you're not gonna find inner peace looking for happiness in those ways.
So how do you find peace then? Or find happiness?
Well, again, I gave like the 5 different key, the hard work, dedication, mindfulness, commitment, and meditation.
And happiness in the being environment, that you
Yeah, the enlightenment experience is one in which you achieve inner peace. It's like this ultimate form of happiness. Now, again, that's the claim. You don't have to believe it. Don't believe it because I say it, and don't believe it because Buddhists say it. I mean, do your own research.
So they're like a permanent thing?
Yeah, I mean, when you have achieved it, essentially, you understand reality. When you have this experience, when you understand reality, you can't not understand it anymore. I mean, you get it. You're woke. Whatever.
Well, in that case, I'm already there.
Go ahead.
So, saying once you're enlightened, you're always enlightened. So, what if you forget? What if you get so distracted by something in life that your understanding of life changes?
I mean, I guess it's possible. I guess you could. I mean, I'm not. I guess it's not impossible that you could, become unenlightened. But in Buddhism, the claim is that we're already all enlightened, insofar as we have the ability to be asleep. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, just because we're
so we kind of all have the ability to be enlightened.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense,
kind
we're
of like a latent thing in us.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we all have this ability. So in a sense, we're all enlightened. We just don't realize it. It's like being asleep.
So essentially, from what we're saying, you could theoretically fall back asleep.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost as if it's a choice.
Extreme example, if you get like crazy Alzheimer's, then you forget all kinds of stuff.
Or you get in a car wreck, or whatever, and bang your head really hard.
Mm-hmm. You could be a totally different person.
Yeah. Or what did you want to say?
So with regard to the question, or so life being the alleviation, or the goal of life being the alleviation of suffering, and to pursue happiness. What about those people? I mean, this includes Buddhists who say set themselves on fire to protest tyrannical governments, or people who suffered horrible deaths to protect people, not for any fear of being judged or going to heaven or anything like that, but because they cared about those people.
So through
I'm basically questioning the belief that happiness is the goal of human experience.
I would say that happiness is the goal of human experience, but according to Buddhism, the way to achieve happiness is through this kind of ultimate compassion for others. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So the Buddhists would say, for example, that sacrificing yourself for another is the ultimate good. So setting yourself on fire in an attempt to stop some tragedy or atrocity.
And so that would be like nirvana then, like ultimate.
No, it wouldn't be nirvana, but they would say that it's the ultimate good. To sacrifice yourself for someone else or for a whole country would be the ultimate good. And so in that way, you could say that people are acting in an ideological sense. Do you see what I'm saying? So ideologically, they're doing this because they believe it's the ultimate good.
And I would have to say, like, why does it matter to them at that point? They're dead. So, like, how is, that, it doesn't seem to me that accomplishes the goal of happiness.
What? Setting yourself on fire?
Well, yeah. Metaphorically speaking, perhaps, or allegorically speaking.
For one thing, the Buddhists believe in reincarnation, right?
Yeah.
So secular Buddhism is about reincarnation, but most Buddhists believe in reincarnation. So they would believe, for example, that setting yourself on fire might give you some karma or whatever.
Okay.
So they wouldn't believe that you would just be gone forever if you were to do that. That would be a selfless act that would maybe eventually lead to your happiness. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but isn't that still seeking happiness through, like, religious experience?
What? By setting yourself on fire?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And this is actually one of the most kind of difficult.
The line is drawn, right?
Well, this is one of the most difficult and paradoxical parts of Buddhism, is that suffering, the cause of suffering is seeking, right? Like I said this, and as one of my perspectives is that you're seeking happiness. From the Buddhist perspective, you already have happiness, right? But the reason you don't realize it is because you're constantly seeking it.
Yeah.
And other things instead of just appreciating it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, what was I saying? Can't remember. Anyway, but the point is, if you would just let go of the seeking, then you would find happiness, just naturally, okay?
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? So in Buddhism, when you go through meditation, with this goal of seeking enlightenment, because that is the goal, you are seeking enlightenment. Before the very end, before you find enlightenment, I know this sounds crazy, but you have to give up the goal of finding enlightenment too. When you're giving up all your goal, you're giving up all seeking by the end. Has anyone ever seen the Avatar, the TV show?
The Last Airbender?
Yeah, the Airbender. Have you seen the Airbender? Have you seen all of it? Remember that part where he says you have to let go of Katara, and he won't? Remember? He's like, you have to let go of everything.
Yeah, because that was a stupid plot twist. It shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
I was real bitter about that.
But that's a very Eastern idea that that is your goal, and it's fine to be motivated by that. But eventually, you even have to let go of the desire to be happy. I mean, the desire for enlightenment or whatever.
That sounds like a really stoic philosophy.
It is. It's very stoic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that comes to mind when I think about Buddhism.
if you have to give everything up, how does that line up with the idea of using determination to get to enlightenment?
You get close with determination. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, you're making progress through meditation and through mindfulness, but then you hit this wall where you can't get there anymore by seeking. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, if mindfulness and meditation is a path.
So, like, it's a car and you use it to get to the store, and then you get out of the car and get into the store kind of thing?
Yeah, like you can only get so far with seeking, and then you even let go of the goal of attaining enlightenment. I know that sounds crazy, but...
Then what's the motivation to keep doing those things once you've attained enlightenment?
To keep doing what?
Like meditation and hard work and commitment. Why would you keep doing those after?
Yeah, I wouldn't say you have to do those anymore. Like, you have the understanding. Like, you understand reality. You get it,
But then it's kind of like so you're enlightened now.
Uh-huh.
So what reason would you have to say die for a Jew who happens to be holed up in his
What reason would you
in
have?
your house? Like, it seems to me like by going through the sufferings that accompany something like that, and then say you get caught and you die, which did happen to plenty of people, it seems like ultimately you just kind of go right back around to.
I mean,
where you were
there's
in the
plenty
first
of
place.
reasons. I guess it's hard for me to understand your line of questioning, because there's plenty of reasons to help others or to sacrifice yourself for others that have nothing to do with seeking happiness.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I'm not saying that
Yeah.
seeking happiness is the only motivation for a human being, or that's not what Buddhists are saying. They're saying that's what our main motivation is.
okay.
That's why we get out of bed in the morning,
Mm.
is to find happiness. We believe that somewhere down the road we're going to get it. But that's not the only reason we do anything, You could save another person even if it doesn't benefit you in any way, just because you wouldn't want that. So if someone's in a building that's on fire, you might go in that building because if it were you would want someone to do it for you. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think I do. And so you would, so would doing that be an example of not longing for anything
Yeah.
anymore? So that would be an example of
That's selflessness.
Yeah. So okay.
It's a big thing in Buddhism is selflessness, is doing things that are not in your self-interest, basically.
So is that kind of like showing that you've given up your own self-interests in a way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of my big questions on that, what kind of, I guess, is there anything comparable to being like a Buddhist missionary, where you have this enlightenment, or you know of this enlightenment, and you want other people to experience this? So you work for it rather than, because I know in many cases people will just seek it themselves. That's generally what I hear.
Well, it's one of those
find
things.
out about it and go sometimes around the world.
I would say that it's part of human nature that when you find something beautiful or amazing, you want to share it with others. I think that is just part of our nature, and I think that's one of the reasons that religion spread, is because people feel like they have something and they want to share it with others. And so if you've ever, I encourage you to watch the BBC documentary about the life of Buddha. It's really good. But basically, when he achieved enlightenment, he was the first person to ever do it. First person that we know of. And his first thought was, man, this is really nice. I should just sit here and enjoy it. Fuck everyone else. You know what I mean? And then yeah, exactly. And then he had a lot of inner conflict. He's like, I could try to teach everyone this, but they're not going to believe me. And what's the point in trying to help others? You know what I'm saying? Like, there was a huge conflict within him about whether he should keep the secret to himself or try to help others. And ultimately, he decided to help others, right? Now, I wouldn't say he has any reason to help others except that he wanted to share it. I mean, it's like...
You said he had this inner conflict, though.
Yeah, he did have an inner conflict. It's like, okay, so let me give you an example.
And then he had suffering again.
It's not suffering. Pain is different than suffering, right?
Okay.
So when we talk about suffering, we mean something very existential. Something that sticks with you. You see what I'm saying? Like, you can be enlightened and still stub your toe. Someone that close to you can die. Doesn't mean that you never feel pain, but suffering is something different than pain. See what I'm saying?
Okay. I just want to say that's
I'm not
not
really
really
like
how I think of suffering, but I can see that as a definition of it.
Yeah.
at this point. I'm not really like, oh, you go on ahead.
Hold that thought, because we're running. Too many times it's not a factor, but some people have to go. Real quick, tomorrow evening, as far as I know, do you know? At 5 o'clock? Dan Barker.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock, if you can make it, Dan Barker will be on campus. Atheist, converted, supposedly went from Christianity to atheism. Is he going to be in Don Morris room?
I believe it's in Smith. I think it's in
I do too.
Recital hall, perhaps. I'd have to check.
Yeah, I've put it out there a couple of times on our Facebook page, just to remind you that I think it's something you should go listen to if you can. Not because I'm promoting atheism, but
you can't come there.
So you can so you can hear that side by somebody that does this, I guess, for a living, for lack of better terms. Anyway.
Where and when again?
Huh?
Where and when exactly?
Tomorrow at 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Smith Hall.
On campus, we think at Smith Hall.
Somewhere in Smith.
In the recital hall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I wasn't sure where. Next Tuesday, 7 o'clock, unless you want to do it earlier, we're meeting at Fat Patty's. Club's buying.
My Bible study. Yeah, my Bible study's meeting in there at 7 o'clock.
Fat Patty's?
Yeah.
Oh.
Would
I
anyone object to having it earlier?
can't do any earlier than 7 o'clock.
And honestly, I have another commitment at 8, so, but I'll be there for a while.
I really didn't hear all that.
I could maybe do 6:30, but that'd be a little late.
So 7, you can get there sometime between, or you can't stay the whole time?
Yeah, I can be there at 7. I just won't
Okay.
stay that late.
Okay, let's do that. 7 o'clock, the club's buying, and the reason we're doing it on Tuesday is because it's buy one, get one free. So believe it or not, there's logic behind the madness. Everyone's welcome. Those who haven't been here in a while, a lot of times we have some people show up that we've not seen in a couple of years. Well, seriously, because they used to come to meetings or whatever, and they have the opportunity to get back together with people and see what's going on. Congratulations to those who are new officers. Mark and I will get with you in the near future. If anyone wants to contest the election or has a problem with what was said, like I said, let me know before Monday. And if you want the copy of the Constitution, email me and I will send you a copy. Email me your email address. Text me your email address. However you want to contact me to let me know you want a copy. How's that?
Email you my phone number.
Email me your phone number and I'll text it back to you.
Because independent doesn't mean anything.
Questions, comments?
By the way, Dan Barker is in Smith Music Hall, Recital Hall.
Smith Music Hall.
Awesome.
Tomorrow evening at 5, I plan to attend, but that's kind of dependent on a couple other things. But at this point, I plan on coming 5 o'clock tomorrow. So, questions, answers, comments? Adam will be there. You can give him a hug and a kiss at that point.
He's gonna give you a nice little smooch on the forehead to send you off.
Tuesday. He normally comes. He and Rob and like I said, a lot of people. They're part of us. They've been with us longer than a lot of people have. So we consider them a part of us. Did I say that nice?
We're brothers and sisters in Christ.
I wouldn't go that far.
We're like brothers, but closer.
Pray for our new officers because those two are leaders this coming semester.
I feel like if we were in a classroom environment, like you two would be separated.
I am very similar in a classroom environment to the way I'm a little bit crazier in here because it's not a class technically, but not much crazier.
All right, you may continue your discussion offline. Thank you.
Just a general comment about your presentation.